Hello, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us for Sustainable Storytelling, Uplifting Indigenous Land Stewardship in Film and TV, supported by Telefilm Canada. I'm Carrie-Anne Cardinal, Programming Indigenous Lead for the Sustainable Production Forum, and I'm happy to be here online with you all. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm currently on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And now, some housekeeping. Firstly, we'll be taking polls. So we'll be publishing polls throughout the session, and every time you participate, you will be entered to win a limited edition SPF24 t-shirt. Secondly, we'll have Q&A. So we'll save 10 minutes towards the end of the session for questions. Please pop them into the chat. And you can test it out now by letting us know where you are tuning in from. Thirdly, we'll have closed captions and languages. So if you are viewing from Swap Card and would like to access closed caption in a language other than English, please join the Zoom webinar by clicking the link to your left under the event description. Once inside the webinar, you'll have the option via the lower menu bar for captions to be simultaneously translated into French or another language. And lastly, please tag us on social media using hashtag SPF24 and hashtag Sustainable Production Forum. But first off, we'll hear from Mainville, President, Sustainability, Talent and Culture with Telefilm Canada, to say a few opening remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm Marie-Ève Mainville, Vice President of Sustainability, Talent and Culture at Telefilm Canada. It is great to see so many of you join today's important discussion on sustainable storytelling, uplifting Indigenous land stewardship in film and television. Indigenous peoples and communities have been stewards of the land for generations. They carry with them a profound and holistic knowledge of how we can better navigate our way in the natural world and to do so respectfully. Today's panelists, Indigenous creators, will speak to sustainable production practices through an Indigenous lens. They will explore how Indigenous land stewardship, with its deep-rooted understanding of environmental sustainability, can inspire and transform the storytelling and production practices in the screen-based industry. I'm here to listen and learn alongside you. At Telefilm, our goal is to bring Canadian and Indigenous creativity to audiences around the globe. And we do this by investing in and by promoting Canadian and Indigenous cinema. We need to rethink sustainability from all perspectives, and we want to do so responsibly and inclusively for a healthy and competitive future for creators. From across the country, many filmmakers like yourself are exploring ways to reduce our carbon footprint. We share your commitment to be part of this necessary change. To that end, we are so happy to support this conversation. Let's begin the panel session.
Thank you so much, Marie-Ève. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful guests. I'll start off with Tracey Bonneau, writer and producer with Of the Land Productions, Inc. Doreen Manuel, director of Bosa Center for Film and Animation, School of Motion Picture Arts at Capilano University. Lisa Holmberg, CEO of Arctic Indigenous Fund, and our moderator, Ken Prue, Director, Partnerships and Export Initiatives at Telefilm Canada. Take it away, Ken.
Get myself off mute here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carrie-Anne, Marie-Ève, for the words to start out. I am pleased to be here as well. I think the subject matter is just so important, and the Indigenous view is just so important. I'm happy to be here with Doreen and Tracey, who I haven't met before, so I'm here to learn from you guys as well. And Lisa, who I've met many times, and we've worked together. It's great to see you again and be here. I want to jump right into it and kind of set the geography of everything. So maybe we could start with one at a time, and we could start with Doreen. Maybe tell us a bit about your nation and your community, where you're from, and a little bit of what stewardship means to you and your community.
Well, I'm originally from the Secwepemc territory, up around what's called Chase, BC. and our territory expands to the central part of BC. That's my father's territory. My mother's territory is the Ktunaxa, which are in the eastern southern tip of British Columbia. But I actually reside in an urban center. I reside on Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Musqueam territories in Vancouver. So I grew up off the reserve. I grew up like in residential school, and then following my dad's career, I lived in Quebec for a while with my dad. I've lived all over like different places out northern Alberta, different places in BC. So I think like I really feel a connection to my Secwepemc territory. It's where I spent most of my time, but I also feel quite close to my mother's territory because that's where I went when I got out of residential school to stay with my grandma for a while, and to start my healing process there. So when you ask like about my territory, it's kind of all over the place. But what it means to you ask what it means to me, right?
Yeah, so I mean, and it's interesting because you're talking, you've been spread across many different regions, and I guess the question is, what does land stewardship mean to you? And has it, I guess, a follow-up question, has it changed with moving around, or does it kind of stay the same sentiment?
Well, I was raised into it.
Yeah.
My dad was Grand Chief George Manuel. My mother was a spiritual leader, and they were also residential school survivors. But even through all of that, being broken and damaged and struggling to try to even figure out what wellness is and trying to raise a family when, neither of them had parents because they were raised in the residential school, they still taught us through all of that. Somehow what survived in them was a really deep-rooted connection to the territory as our family, as part of our family, not just as a thing that's there, but as our family, and that, this need to protect it. And so even with as little guidance as I received, when I hit my teen years, I came back from Quebec to live with my mom because she had suffered a horrendous loss, and she was part of the DIA the Department of Indian Affairs takeover in Nanaimo. So I had just barely gotten home, and she actually worked at that Indian Affairs office, and she helped shut it down. And from there, her and I traveled to all of the roadblocks and protests through the 70s. And she kind of guided me into it. And my dad was against roadblocks and demonstrations, and my mom was for it. So I traveled with my mom, and we were part of the Concerned Aboriginal Women's Movement, the Indian Child Caravan, and that rolled into the Constitution Express. And we were very hardcore activists. And so when I'm living with those people, I was even part of the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee because I was a kid, but there was hundreds of us living at the Friendship Center in Vancouver, hundreds of us activists, and we would go down to the courthouse every single day and stand there for Leonard Peltier. And that's how I grew up, was breathing it, living it, breathing it. And it wasn't anything, it wasn't a sacrifice, and it was nothing foreign. It was just part of the identity I was forming as a Indigenous woman, knowing that one day I would have children, and thinking about became innate to think about everything as how it would affect the future generations.
Amazing. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you for sharing that. So what a great start. And we'll definitely come back to a lot of that. Tracey, same question to you. A bit about your nation, your community, and what stewardship means to you.
Why Castell Halt is Gwist Sumagat and Ils and Binkton. Why Pijiap is Naxil. So what I said was my name is Sumaxatkʷ, and I'll tell you about my name in relation to the question. And what I said was that hello to all my relatives. So my name Sumaxatkʷ was given to me by my great uncle, and my great uncle is Martin Louis, and my name is part of an ancestral line of water protectors along the Columbia River system and keeping the water system and the Columbia River salmon sustainable. And so sumaxatkŭ was related to the salmon chief in our hereditary line, Kinkanahwa. And so the translation of my name is I get my power from the water. And when we think of the word power, sumich, in my language, it doesn't translate to what we think about in terms of power in a European sense, in a colonial sense. What it means is what your spirit is, finding your spirit and knowing your purpose and your responsibility. So what does stewardship mean to me? Stewardship for me is it contained in my language. And there's a terminology that I grew up with Indian Silkchan language. I'm part of the Syilx Nation. I'm a Syilx member of the Syilx Nation, and our language is part of the Interior Salish language group. And so there's a word that in our language, it's tamich. And tamich refers to every living thing, that everything alive. And you see those Saskatoon berries behind me, which is one of the 4 food chiefs. That's tamich. You see the leaves on the branches. That's tamich. So everything that is living are our relatives. We have a kin relationship with them. And that goes back to our laws of our 4 food chiefs. And so in terms of what stewardship means to me and how I understand it growing up, living on my reserve, I did leave my reserve for a period of time to attend Capilano College in the 80s to take some media arts training, and then I took some business training but came home. The idea that we are related to virtually everything on the Tumhulach, this earth. And the word Tumhulach refers to the living thing that is spinning, and it's spinning continuously because it's alive. And so for us, in terms of Syilx people and myself, when I think about what sustainability is, what my responsibility and stewardship, it's taking into account every single thing that lives. And is it protected? Are we doing our best to ensure that it has places to live, that it has the right system in place so that it can survive? And that's our responsibility as Syilx people. And if we're not doing that, then we are a threat to ourselves. Because when we damage any system, impact any system, we're damaging ourselves, because we're all related, we're all interconnected. So that would be how I understand what stewardship is from the focus of my community. Waihi.
Thank you, Tracey. Thank you for sharing. And I love that you use the word responsibility. And I think that's an important word that we'll maybe even come back to. Thank you, Tracey, so much. Lisa, good to see you. It's been a long time. Same question to you. Tell us a bit about your community, your nation, and what stewardship means to you.
Yeah, I'm Lisa Holmberg from Sápmi, Samiland. I was born in Finland and I'm working in Norway, but we are borderless. We are living in four different countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Russia. But the borders, they came late. We were here many thousand years before. And we were, like, my grandmother was born in so-called Norway, but now there is a big border. And I was born in Sevetjärvi, which is quite near the Arctic Ocean, but not the coastline. We are forest people. And to me, this stewardship means very much protecting the forest and water. And like Tracey said, what is the power? The power means, to me, it means who owns whose forest? And that's the big question, because the countries like Finland is saying the forest is the Finnish forest, but actually it's our community forest. And then because the nature is lifeline to us, there is we can't live if we are not taking care of the land and the water. And keeping our land living is our future. And there we coming to the storytelling, keeping our stories living, that's our future. And then it's the power, who owns the forest, who owns the stories. And that's very important when you are a filmmaker in the indigenous communities, to keep your stories and keep your land and take care of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. All three of you, you present the stewardship as more than just a concept of sustainability. I mean, it's a responsibility, like you said, Tracey. I'm going to throw this to all three of you, and let me know who wants to jump in first. But when we're talking about this responsibility and this stewardship for sustainability, how do you feel it translates to film? What is the best way to explain that in your opinion? Is there anybody that wants to take that? Doreen, maybe, since we started with you, we can circle back.
In some ways, it's hard to answer because of colonization, because of, residential school disrupting the harmony of our family system and of our natural learning. You've got people on this call, us three, who've been privileged to be able to find a way to our roots and to our understanding of our culture and our being, our identity. But there are so many people in our communities and in the urban centers that have not had that privilege, that are really struggling. Absolutely. There are filmmakers coming up. I manage this big film center. I've been part of this Indigenous film program for a really long time, since 2003. And a lot of and so I've watched the group I graduated with, and I've watched the group that have come after me, and a lot of them are struggling for identity. And that's the whole purpose of having these exclusive Indigenous film programs, so that these people can come in there and search for their identity as not just Indigenous people, but as storytellers. Yeah. And that's a long journey. That's, our program is only 2 years long. That takes a lot longer to get there, to find your voice, to Absolutely. Be able to speak out your knowledge, to collect all your knowledge so that you have something to speak out about, and then to weave that into your identity as a filmmaker who will tell story in those different mediums. So I don't actually see a lot of what people would call environmental films coming out of the Indigenous community. And part of that, I think, is because it's a lot more powerful when you just weave in your values into the story. You weave in, like, you see the characters just in their natural way, just caring for the land and caring for our values. But, we have this constraint of deadlines, and it makes it really hard to really properly weave films when you're pressing up against deadlines. And to write a script, there's a deadline. And then to get it produced, there's all these deadlines. And then there's, it really affects the end product. Because ideally, if we were to really film our existence, really build our true existence into our stories, into our characters, that would really be true Indigenous teaching. because that's how we teach, is by role modeling. So
Yeah.
for, some people role modeled to me. So this is how I came to be who I am, is by the powerful people who influenced my identity. And I hopefully would be so honored if people are looking to me now, because I try really hard. That's part of how I try really hard to stay sober, to stay clean, to stay all these things that I really try and work hard to do. It's because the young ones are watching me.
Yeah.
And I need to exemplify these behaviors that I hope will reach the greater world. Because, in my way, we start right here. If we want change, it starts right here, the I. And then by role modeling, we affect our family. And then our family hopefully adopts those values, and they affect the community. And then the community are leaders that affect the whole nation. And that's how we teach. That's the normal way of teaching. So if we could weave and incorporate that into film somehow, then that, I think, is the ideal goal of Indigenous cinema, is to be able to actually truly be woven and not just plopped on the page and plopped onto, video, the way this machine has been built by Hollywood and is now affecting all of us. We need to kind of slow back down and find ways to affect how funding is offered so that we can actually build true Indigenous cinema and not have something, all those constraints plopped on top of us.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
But really, one of the things I practice, and since I've become a director, I haven't been able to really make much film. I help everybody make their films, but I haven't been able to really make my own films for a little while now. But what I was playing with, what I was working with, was connecting to the spirits. And I actually went to the Rocky Mountains, and I fasted in the middle of the Rocky Mountains to try to gain storyteller power. And then what I wanted to do was practice making the spirits my co-writer, co-director, co-producer, and having prayer at every step of the way. And I have successfully made a couple of films that way, where I really communicated with the spirits. And a song even came to me during one of my filmmaking experiences. So I'm trying to grow it out. And I think there's a lot of filmmakers that are doing that. They're just not examining it and kind of maybe not doing it quite the same way as I'm doing it. But I think a lot of Indigenous filmmakers turn to spirit and have that whole energy involved with the filmmaking. And to me, that's, everything is connected to our spirits. Every part of our being, every part of our lives. And so why not the whole filmmaking process?
Amazing. Thank you. Tracey and Lisa, how do you feel about that?
The question again?
So it was how does it translate to filmmaking, the stewardship we talked about, and then obviously Doreen got into a lot of how her background's affected her filmmaking and whatnot. So it's I don't want to I'm trying to make it as broad as possible, but that's the starting point.
Well, from what I know and what I understand is the idea that when coming from a place of knowledge, building knowledge, and transmitting that knowledge and those knowledge systems that we're revitalizing in our communities. So in terms of the opportunity that we have within our communities, and we're in a very unique, very powerful time in terms of our communities revitalizing and embracing identity and seeking ways to do that. So I think that coming from the perspective of expanding knowledge and the responsibilities around that, and looking at different ways to bring their knowledge forth in a unique way. And one project that I was involved in with the Indigenous Screen Office was a guide and a document sharing and how we as filmmakers, as storytellers, how do we engage with our communities, and how do we engage in different scenarios. And so when I developed my series Quest Out West Wild Food, it wasn't a series about food. It was greater than that, because our 4 food chiefs are who determine our laws and governance as Syilx people. And prior to colonial settlement, we were 100% sustainable. So every year, everything came back at 100% sustainability. And so when I decided that this was going to be something that I wanted to speak to, not just our members of the Syilx community, but members of the community that were involved in regenerative processes and regenerating the earth, like organic farmers and different individuals, and helping the voices come together for them to share their knowledges, I had to put together a protocols guide, because within the knowledge system and the responsibility that I had was that there are certain medicines, there are certain ideas that are sacred, and that maybe my community members as a whole don't want me to share. So what I'm getting at is that I, as an individual storyteller, my take on it is that it's a collective process, that the idea that I can just go and tell this story about my nation and my region without speaking to the important people, the land keepers, the water keepers, and what is it that you don't want to see on screen. And so I developed that guide. And so to answer your question, I think that each year, each production learns that in the process, and we have a collective now of filmmakers, Indigenous filmmakers, that have really perfected those ways. And we've made mistakes too. And as Doreen is saying, it is the ones that are being called on that have been doing this for many years and guiding and becoming role models for that. And Doug Cuthand said this years ago when I brought him together for a forum. He's a filmmaker. And I was asking about origins of resistance. Are our stories all about resistance, and where did that come from? And it was just an interesting panel. And he said something very interesting, and I always quote him on this. He said, every time I talk to young filmmakers and I do workshops, they always say, I want to tell this story to help my people. He said he does not find that in the non-Indigenous community. You won't find a filmmaker to say, I'm doing this to help my people in a general sense, right? And he says the communities and groups that he has mentored over the years, that is the constant theme that's come through. So I just wanted to leave that thought in terms of what Doug Cuthand had said many, many years ago, and it always stuck with me.
I mean, I'm not surprised, but it's good to hear it. You know what I mean? Like it's a great statement. Thanks, Tracey. Lisa, talk a little bit. I mean, the question is, how does it translate to filmmaking? Well, AIFF is doing just that, right? It's translating the Indigenous stewardship to filmmaking in a lot of the films that you're doing. And I think there's a sense of urgency in the films as well that maybe you could speak to.
Yeah, first of all, it is different. Always they are asking what is so special in the Indigenous storytelling or Sami storytelling, and it is, our stories are circle. They are going like circle. And it's very difficult to put it in the Aristotle way so that it's starting and ending, and there is, so that's one thing, which means that it takes time. We have to wait because we are just waiting anyway to our reindeer, and we are waiting what is happening in the nature, and it's going like a circle. So everything is happening again and again and again. and it means that we have to have time. But in Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, it's very important to include the communities and the people and give them support and opportunity to make their way the films that it and they can tell it by our own premises, like our own eyes and our own circle way. And also that there is no hierarchy, like usually in the normal filmmaking, there are a big hierarchy, and who is the boss and who is saying what and what is the timetable. But in our films, the nature is the timetable, and the inclusion of all the community. If I'm going to any community, I have to include those people to that film. So we are making now this kind of a short film series, Arctic Indigenous Witness, about the climate change, and they are very short, but they are all around the Arctic. This is the second year, and they are telling what is happening to them, to their land, and they are very personal films. They are community-based films, or also like the forest or rivers, or salmon or reindeer. What is important to those people, and they are very much different films than any other who is just coming here up in the north and making lots of filmmakers wants to come up here in the north and Arctic and make films about climate change, but they are like 5 days here and that's it. Then they go back home and edit the film. But our people, we are all the time here and we can witness what is really happening. So that's very important for the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund to give the voice and picture and sound and everything to our people.
Thanks, Lisa. Tracey and Doreen, as filmmakers, at what point in time in the process of filmmaking, I mean, and I know Doreen, you talked about, connecting, with the spirits and whatnot, and Tracey as well, but for, people listening in on the panel that, that want to, I don't know, have more of a sustainable view, at what point in time in the filmmaking process would you say they need to start looking, more deeply at that? And I know, it's easy to say at the very, very beginning from ideation, but I guess, what do you see as the most important parts along the way? You know what I mean? A lot of people would. I'm saying this because a lot of people would say like, oh, during production we're gonna not destroy the land or whatever, but that's just one part of it. You know what I mean? Do you have any kind of tips or any concepts you wanted to share?
Well, it has to be right from the very beginning because it's
Yeah,
it's a
course.
mindset.
Yeah.
And it's a mindset that we want everybody to adopt.
Mhm.
We've been erased from, erasure has been practiced on us from the beginning of Hollywood. We were either there in existence as heathens and savages and horrors and bad people, or we didn't exist. Like I've done a study of Westerns because my dad used to watch Westerns and we used to watch Westerns. And when you talk to Indigenous people all across Canada, they say, oh yeah, well, our family watched Westerns. So I bought hundreds of Westerns and watched them and isolated clips of places where they make these derogatory messages. So I could do a whole study on how this identity was formed in the minds of mainstream Canadian people of a certain generation. And that was started like that from the time you were little. When you look at the cartoons from way back when that I was exposed to as a child, all the derogatory, horrible things that were said about our people and the derogatory images and caricatures of us that were there, that were imprinted in people's minds from the adults of that generation to the kids who are here now, my generation. And then you come to understand this horrible image they have of our people and this lack of regard for what we value. So that whole thing needs to be reversed now. And we need to, I sit on the board of directors of Knowledge Network, and I've worked really hard to change the mindset there and to help them understand that we are responsible for developing the palate, the appetite for media in British Columbia. CBC and CTV should be taking the same stand where we are developing true Canadian cinema, true Indigenous cinema. And we should decide what that is and not allow Hollywood to keep dictating to us what it is based on market value of the productions or what their market value of the productions are. And so we need to begin it at the beginning, because really ceremony begins at the beginning. And storytelling is a ceremony. It's a certain type of a ceremony, and inviting the spirits to come in. For instance, if you're making a movie about murdered and missing women, well, you invite the ancestors. You invite the ancestors to come in and protect that story. You invite the murdered and missing women to come in and walk with you to make sure that you make the right steps and develop the message in the right way, that it's going to be the most impactful. When people talk about sustainability within cinema, and they talk about the messaging, that you can't beat people over the head with the message because that's not very effective. You need to weave those things in. Well, that's what comes natural to us, is weaving those things in, if we're giving the space to do that. The space financially, I'm talking about the space with the deadlines being suiting our needs rather than us having to fit into what suits what they think their needs are, because they have this whole concept of marketability of the film and deadlines and suiting their schedules. So sorry, I think I went off in a direction and forgot the original question.
That's okay. No, it's super important. I mean, it's all, to me, it's all connected. You know what I mean? So, it all connects back to sustainability of a culture, sustainability, of the land. So it's for me, it's all interconnected. So nothing's off the table for discussion. The way I see it, anyways. Tracey, did you want to add something to that? You seemed like you.
Yeah, I think one of the impacts that we as filmmakers, directors, writers, one of the impacts that I did see in season 4 of Quest Out West Wild Food was the wildfires in the Merritt area completely impacted my decision to have to move the bulk of my stories and rewrite the scripts and locations back to the Okanagan. And that was because the recovery of the Merritt area, they had experienced a flood, an enormous flood that devastated their communities, the Indigenous communities there, and then the wildfires. And so they were rebuilding their community, literally roads and bridges. And so how that impacted our season 4 was that I needed to come back to the Okanagan and figure out a way to tell that story. We managed to get one episode in Merritt. And the other reason is we couldn't get the hotels because the hotels were filled with contractors and Indigenous people rebuilding the bridges, the roads, the houses, and that region. So I wanted to bring that concept up of climate change and how that impacts. That's a very important consideration that we are constantly up against in terms of the community. And I will talk about Indigenous science. So we know with Indigenous knowledge and sustainability in science, we know when the spetlum is ready. We know when the shak is ready. There are indicators for tens of thousands of years that guide us and tell us these are ready to be harvested and this is the time. And so if you're exploring that as an Indigenous filmmaker, you're not going to be able to put together a calendar that possibly in 1 year with my VR 360 project, Huckleberry, that was just part of DigiBC. The plan was to go out and film these huckleberries, with this incredible camera. And it was during the year of the heat dome. And so that was the story that I needed to tell, because that's an important part of informing my crew members, my team members, the community members, the people that I was meeting with. So I will end with some really important logistical things that I see on the ground. There is this concept that we need to do things fast and we need to do things quick, and we're not going to adopt a sustainable practice within our daily routines. So we have, our call sheet is 6 a.m. in the morning, and we have water. We have cases of water bottles that are plastic water bottles that individuals are using throughout the day. And yes, maybe they're being recycled. So really taking a look at how can we, within our own small crews, do things better. And if we're doing things better, what is the knowledge and the reasoning and debriefing around that? So there's some real practical things that I think are happening within film crews, but it's not happening enough. And that's because, as Doreen has said, the constraints of budgets, timelines, that does impact an Indigenous person or a crew and their decision to say, let's make this sustainable. And carpooling, all of that stuff, you're not thinking about it if you've got a deadline. So deadlines are incredibly, constraining. They have constraints to them. If you want to move and continue in a sustainable way. I've been to gatherings where you have to bring your own fork, spoon, and knife and your own plate, and you wash it every single day. And we're not doing that with craft services, if we're working on, bigger productions and whatnot. So I'll leave it at that, because I know others have to share.
No, that's okay. And are you speaking, is it specifically on the financing part for the deadlines for Doreen and Tracey? Is that it's specifically there, or is it deadlines with other things too?
Well, what I will say is you have X amount of time to complete this, this, and this.
Right.
And in that time constraint, let me just, I'll turn it over to Doreen. The amount of money that Indigenous filmmakers get for productions is horrific. It's and that's all I'll say is to be able to do this properly, sustainably, and the way that we need to do within our communities. We have to fight for every line item to ensure that we're going to do it the way we need to. That's not in policy yet. Telefilm may think it is, and CMF may think it is, and CBC and all of, but it's not. And I can tell you that from my own experience.
It's good to hear. Thank you, Tracey. Needs to be said. We're almost at the time for questions. I think we have one that's come up already. And for those of you that are listening in, you can drop questions in the Q&A at the bottom. The first question we have for everyone is, has the representation of Indigenous culture and story been improved over the past few years by non-Indigenous filmmakers, or do you still see stereotypes being made?
I still see stereotypes being made, and I see our own people feeding into the stereotypes too, and that comes from, a lot of people say they don't have to go to film school. I might agree with them that maybe with non-Indigenous film school, but the purpose of Indigenous film school is for us to develop what I was talking about earlier, our history. You need to know our history and understand how and why we weren't involved in the film industry until the 70s, really. There were a few people who were prior to the 70s, but en masse, more people didn't start coming into the 70s. That was because we were locked on reservations through the pass system. We were experiencing residential school. So when the film industry started in the late 1800s in Canada, how were we supposed to be involved? And then all of that oppression manifested itself in an inability to be artistic and to be free with a voice. And we started to gain our voice in the 70s, and it ramped up from there. And as I mentioned about earlier, erasure was an effect also, and it still is an effect. You still see films like This Changes Everything, that documentary. No Indigenous people, every other nation of person, did no Indigenous people. And Tantu Cardinal stood up and voiced that really powerfully. And the filmmaker, his answer, oh, my bad. Yeah. Literally, I was there. My bad is what he said. But that's one example. There's so many examples. I mean, Wind River, they hired a Chinese woman to play an Indigenous person. Really? Are we still just there in history? And there's just over and over and over examples. I mean, I even Knowledge Network, that film, Search and Rescue. They are doing the search and rescue on the Squamish Tsleil-Waututh territories. Not once. I watched the entire first season looking for one mention of being thankful for being on these territories, one mention of the fact that the Squamish people still maintain their old traditional trails and they're up there, and those people are using them today to find and help search and rescue people, and they make no mention of appreciation to us. And it's time and time and time and time and time again, constantly. And if we are involved, like in these bigger TV series, like Criminal Minds or CSI, there'll be little episodes where we are there a little bit, but you can tell they never invited any Indigenous writers because it's so poorly written. Our characters are so poorly developed that we may as well not be there because they're just adding to the stereotypes and to the problem. And when they do represent us, we're stuck way back in, 100 years ago. We haven't evolved out to who we are today. When you look around at who we are today, we have famous composers, famous filmmakers, famous doctors. We have really evolved and taken on Western education and I run this entire film center, and I'm a little brown woman. There's people like that all throughout the world. Yeah. And they still have us walking around bare feet and,
just just to give the counter or the opposite as well. What would be good representation? What are some examples of that you want to give just to show what you'd like to see more of, I guess?
Tracey's TV series. Like there's this good, really responsible, educate Tracey Kim Bonneau's her
Tracey's
TV series.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, there's really good teachings in there. I mean, go to any Indigenous film festival throughout the world, and there's good product in there.
Absolutely.
And people should be going to these film festivals. Yeah. And people, non-Indigenous people who are listening, they should be asking themselves, whose territory are you making this film on? Why don't you ask yourself how those people could represent them? I mean, there was even a show about tea that was on Knowledge Network, and I said, Indigenous people are famous for tea. Why didn't they interview an Indigenous person? There's a non-Indigenous filmmaker making a TV series, a mini series for Knowledge Network right now on the forest fires. And every time I see him, I drill him. Which Indigenous people you've been talking to? Because Lytton was wiped out. I'm just go on and on and on and fill his head constantly, because I feel like if I don't do that, we're going to wind up seeing the series and there's going to be very little mention of Indigenous people.
Absolutely, those are great examples. Just because I know we don't have too much time left, I just wanted to throw it to Lisa because obviously you're in a different country completely. Even though I know we think of the Arctic as one is one land, but how do you see that, the representation in the Scandinavian and Greenland and everywhere?
It's constant fight because they want to come and make our stories, and
Mm.
they are saying we are helping you, and
Mm.
we are saying we don't need your help. We can do our films by ourselves. And we made the guidelines to the Sami how to make sustainable film together with Sami people, with us. We are saying we are not stopping you, but please come and work with us, come and ask from us, and then there is a guidelines how to make it in the right way, so
Mm.
that they can't say that they didn't know. And but to me, it's the answer for that is to train and educate our own people to make the films. And it's also a sustainable way, because we are up in the north, far away from the centers. So it's quite expensive to come here with the big groups, like a film crew. But if we have everything here, if we have photographs, everything, so we don't have to fly with people everywhere, and then we can. But the only thing, and can you know that it is money. We don't have indigenous film funding is quite limited. You have quite much money there in Canada, but here in Scandinavia, in Greenland, in Alaska, in Russia, there is no funding. And that's why we have started this Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, so that we could have own money for giving and opening the gates for our own people, and opening also the gates for training, and training on locations, and giving that kind of opportunities. And one thing which is good now is that the indigenous films are in the major film festivals, like Toronto International Film Festival. Last year there were, I don't know how many indigenous films, and Berlinale and Venice and Cannes. And when they are opening to our people, then there is more opportunities to make films, and more opportunities to funding also.
Absolutely. Lisa, really quickly, did you want to plug your own film festival that I know you want people to come to, but when is it again?
Yes, Kamagovat. It's Dark Time Film Festival in end of January up in the North Finland, Inari. It's 24th, 5th, and 6th of January. And we have been making this film festival 26 years. So it wasn't yesterday. And it's unique. It's a small, but it's 100% indigenous. We are not screening anything else than indigenous made films. And then it's the special, we are screening outside in the Snow Theater. And
Amazing. Yeah.
that's yeah, you
And I
are
will get
coming.
there. I will get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you,
Everybody,
Lisa.
welcome.
Yes, yes, yes. A couple of questions because I know we're running out of time. First one is from someone who says, and we touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to know if there's any recommendations of films or books and any other content that would be interesting for people around Indigenous storytelling and sustainability. Anyone? Tracy?
Well, I just very quickly wanted to answer the previous question, and I
Oh,
really want to thank Doreen for bringing up Indigenous institutes and Indigenous programs, because the George Manuel Institute, along with the Naukin Center and NVIT, many years ago started this movement of higher learning in our communities. And I just, wanted to leave with that when we have our own training centers and we have our own people like Doreen, like Lisa, that are building the capacity within the communities, the representation does improve the representation, and we get our people trained. And in terms of books, there is a book that I know Dr. Armstrong just came out with, and I believe I will get the title for it. I should know it off by hand, but I'll just turn it over to the others to see if she's an activist, and she's my mother, but she is known for her work in sustainability. So I'll try to find that, and I'll turn it over to somebody else.
I just put some book titles in the chat. The Fourth World was written. This is a good, and reading them in this order is a good look at the history of Canada, of Indigenous peoples. Because to understand any people, it's to understand history as we see it. So The Fourth World was written by my father in the 70s, and I had it republished not too long ago. Unsettling Canada was written by my brother Arthur, and as was Reconciliation Canada. And Brotherhood to Nationhood was written by Peter McFarlane, and together him and I added to the text, and we had it republished not too long ago. And it just really gives a full history, pretty much to present day, from our early activist days. I wanted to just add a couple of other things. Things that we're doing here at the Bosa Center. We're implementing an Indigenous Green Seal. So anybody here, we make hundreds of films every year. Any of the students here who follow a particular long list of sustainability actions may then apply for added budget to their student film productions and get the Green Seal to be able to put in their film credits. So we're implementing that Green Seal program this year. We have slowly been bringing in sustainable goals and actions over the past few years, and now this is like the enforcers, or this encouragement to get them all on board following the sustainable actions. And I just want to go back to something Tracey mentioned about the feast bag. This is one of my next goals. I'm on the Equity and Inclusion Committee for Screen BC, and I've been working with them for years. So one of the things that I did with them is I really pushed to have a equity and inclusion segment added to the motion picture industry orientation course that everybody who wants to work in the film industry is required to take. So now there's this component in there addressing equity and inclusion and bullying, because the Indigenous people that do enter the film industry are not treated very well. So we're trying to reverse that by educating everybody that actually works in the industry. Now, the next part of that I'm trying to do is have that little section separated out and force everyone who is currently in the industry, if they want to stay working in the industry, they must take that part of the course, because you can fix part of the problem by the new people coming in, but you still got this problem that's already there. The people who are currently working in there that are racist and, have all these bad stereotypes. And then my next thing I would like to see the film industry adopting is a feast bag, where everybody shows up to Seth with their bag, like we do when we go to potlatch or ceremony. We show up with our little bag, and it's got our dish and our bowl and our silverware. And when we leave, we take it with us, and we take it home and we clean it ourselves, and it's all ready. And usually you go to a Indigenous home in a community, there's a whole bunch of extra bags sitting by the door for guests who happen to be visiting and who want to go to the ceremony. So if the whole industry adopted this, we would get rid of paper plates and all of that sort of stuff.
I like it. That's amazing. I'm not sure if we have time for there's one last question about, and maybe, I know we're at the end, but maybe we could, if you could throw it in the chat, if you have anything. Someone had asked if there was, and I'm not sure if they asked if there's any calls for actions to share for either settlers or Indigenous folk. I'm not sure if they mean the actual calls to action to the government, or if there's something more specific to the film industry, but is there any anything you want to share on that, or point everyone to a certain link?
You know, something that bothers me is that Truth and Reconciliation document that was made up. I went through it with a fine-tooth comb, and my brother Arthur is now passed on. He worked very strongly in environmental. He traveled all over the world and was part of all sorts of international groups. But I went to him and I said, I just went through that TNR document with a fine-tooth comb, and not one of those calls to action mentions the environment. What the heck? Who the heck drew this thing up? And he said, I know. And so there are a couple of little sections where you can sort of interpret it. Maybe that's what it's sort of, you could stretch it to mean that, but it's not in there.
Right.
And it should be. People are really, government has adopted, or they say they have anyways, they say they're like following the calls to action, but without the environment being listed in there. Like that's one where they can kind of overstep it and continue to their resource extraction and destruction of our lands. So we need to have that happen. We need to do things like be creative and think about things like a feast bag and different other ways that we can make our productions green. You know, like, and there's a whole bunch of things we do here at Capu. There's not enough time for me to go over all of them, but be creative in maybe hiring an Indigenous person on your set to be wholly responsible for protocols. That's what Bones of Crows did. They hired a team, a couple of people who were responsible for making sure Indigenous protocols were followed and respected. And it was needed because there was a couple of crew members that were just really horrible to Indigenous people. And those two people had to step in and kind of keep this peacefulness on set, and have those people also be responsible for stewardship on the set. I mean, if we can create an intimacy coordinator almost overnight, why can't we create this other role of this other department that oversees these really important matters?
That's a great point.
I would just say the call to action is Ikania. Listen, there's a lot of times I had a phone conversation with a non-Indigenous ally, potentially, but wanted to railroad and get really to what it is that they needed from me in terms of what they want from our cultural center or what they want. And I paused and I said, well, I wasn't finished speaking. And Nia, listen, like we need to listen to each other and share and dialogue. That's a call to action. So that's all I wanted to give. Wait.
Thank you, Tracey. We went over time, but it was a great discussion. Thanks you to the whole SPF team, Lisa, Doreen, Tracey. It was a pleasure meeting you guys. Thank you so much. I hope I get to meet you guys in person one day, and Lisa, I hope I get to see you again in person one day. Miigwech, thank you so much. We'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.